Hi, everybody. Someone submitted a doozy of a question list, and looks like they're really good questions, so I'm excited to answer them. Just before I jump into this video, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to like or share or subscribe or follow or whatever is appropriate on the social media platform you're viewing this video on, I'd really appreciate it. Showing my channel a little bit of love just means a lot to me and just helps to get the word out to more people. If you think my content's useful, other folks might find it to be useful too, so thanks in advance if you don't mind doing that. So the comment on one of my other videos was, so the person has some questions and they are going to be working with a naturopathic doctor in the next few weeks, they say here, but they recently found out they were have been misdiagnosed for 20 years and they actually have Lyme and co-infections, and so they have some questions based on that. So as per usual, nothing I'm saying should be construed as medical advice. This is for informational purposes only, and like the person asking the question, please consult with a clinician if you need medical advice. So, but I'll nonetheless do my best to give some useful information if I can. So one of the questions is, how likely do you think it is that I could, or anyone 20 years infected or untreated, could become symptom-free? So again, can't comment on your case specifically, but I have many patients who have been ill for 20 years or more than 20 years, and they become symptom-free. The general rule that I ascribe to is unless there has been some irreparable damage that's happened, then the potential for healing exists. Now, I say the potential for healing because, of course, that can take a lot of elbow grease, that can take the right knowledge, and quite frankly, time and financial resources to be able to do the right treatments and all of that. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily an easy thing to achieve or that it's like a simple thing in some way, but unless there has been some irreparable damage, then in my experience, symptoms that have been present for far too long, for decades, can be cured and resolved. Now, what I mean by irreparable damage is if, say, someone comes into my office, they have an MS diagnosis, they've been wheelchair bound for a long time, they've had lots of demyelination. Unless the patient's able to access things like stem cells or other more, which aren't necessarily always effective in those cases, but unless there's some type of more heroic type measures like that can be done, we might not be able to bring those. The patient might not be able to walk again, but it doesn't mean we can't maybe help their fatigue or pain or bladder symptoms or whatever it happens to be. Or if a patient had rheumatoid arthritis and they've had a lot of joint destruction because the diagnosis has been present for a long time, a lot of tissue damage has happened, we can't rebuild tissue out of thin air. I mean, we can do things like platelet-rich plasma injections and things, or they might be able to access other therapies that bring more growth factors to the area to try to heal as much damage as possible. But those are symptoms where sometimes there's just irreparable damage done. But if things haven't been irreparably damaged, in my opinion and in my experience, there is the potential for improvement. Next question is, let's see here, provided the toxic bucket is empty and diet is, okay, so, okay, scratch that. It's related to the previous question. Also, I have been researching SOT therapy. What are your thoughts on its effectiveness, especially for late-stage Lyme or CAEBV? I have heard of SOT therapy. I haven't done it. To my understanding, it's quite challenging to access and quite expensive, and I have not looked into it beyond that. So I'm not sure. Good question. I don't think I've had any patients who have had it done. What are my thoughts about the effectiveness of hyperthermia for Lyme? So I've had a few patients who have traveled to various locations, Mexico or Germany. They've had hyperthermia, and a couple of those patients found that the hyperthermia was the only thing that was helpful for them up to that point. Now, the fact that they eventually came to see me because they weren't 100% better or they'd had a relapse, you can kind of read between the lines on that a little bit. But I think that hyperthermia is a really cool therapy. Sorry, worst reverse pun ever. I think it's an amazing therapy, and quite frankly, if I had an extra, several $100,000 kicking around, I would very happily buy a hyperthermia chamber or a device, because I think it is something that could be very useful for patients with chronic infections and also with cancer diagnoses as well. But very hard to access that in beautiful Canada, and not many of my patients have accessed that, but I have heard some good things from the few patients who have done it. Let's see here. I'm just mentioning in the question that Europe and Mexico seem to be the places to go for that. There are clinics in Canada that do offer hyperthermia. I have a colleague in Ontario that I believe offers it, one in BC that offers it. I'm sure there's other places. So it's not just out of North America where folks can get access to that, but not something that's easily accessible. What are my thoughts on Gerson therapy for Lyme? I've never, haven't had any patients who have used it, so I'm not sure about that one. And do I think that EBOO IV therapy is better than 10-pass ozone IV therapy? So EBOO, where if memory serves, that's basically a process where essentially all of your blood is removed through one tube, not all at once, but like, so blood is leaving one arm, moving in through some tubing, and then it's being treated with ozone, maybe some ultraviolet blood irradiation, or running through some type of a filter, and then it goes through that tubing and then goes into the other arm and goes back in. And so basically all of your blood is purified, essentially, to my understanding. I don't think I've had any patients who have done EBOO, so I'm not sure, and I don't know how it compares directly to 10-pass ozone. I've had a number of patients who have gone to other clinics to have 10-pass ozone. 10-pass ozone is really cool, but it's just something that's quite expensive for patients, and just my patient demographic would be not something that's really sustainable here. So that's why I don't do 10-pass ozone. To be honest, with talking to colleagues who use 10-pass, and I ask them, how does 10-pass compare to just regular ozone? It does seem like it's somewhat better, but not like night and day different better. I know there are some interesting case reports out there. Dr. Robert Rowan, really brilliant medical doctor from California, he talks about 10-pass. He's a big proponent of it, has some really awesome case reports on it. But in terms of how consistently it's markedly better than regular ozone, I'm not sure about that. I've kind of heard some mixed reviews, but how they compare, I think they're both really fascinating therapies, but I don't have enough experience with them to really comment beyond that. And then lastly, what do I think of the addition of UV light to IV ozone treatments? So we do ultraviolet treatments here to complement ozone treatments, and I think they're really, really helpful. We do a different method. We do something called oh my goodness, I called it intravenous. That's the word I was looking for. Intravenous photobiomodulation, where essentially all of the blood is treated multiple times with the UV light. With most like UBI systems, ultraviolet blood irradiation systems, you're typically treating about, if memory serves, about 60 milliliters of the patient's blood, which can still be helpful, but in my opinion and my experience, the other method that we use, it works better. But to my understanding, and I haven't done that smaller blood volume method of ultraviolet blood irradiation before, but from what I understand from my colleagues, it can be very helpful, and as an addition to ozone, it brings more antimicrobial treatment into the mix. But the method that we use, I think, is even better, which is why we use that method instead. So thank you for the questions. I couldn't answer half of them, give or take, but that's okay. I did my best, and hopefully that gives you some useful information to think about. So thank you for the questions, and if anybody has, you the asker, or if anybody else has any questions about these topics or anything else, just post it in the comment section below, and I'll answer as soon as I can.